Perry, the ad hoc committee on the proposed downtown stadium and events center special meeting. Today is Monday, April 18, 2011. We are in room 1050. It's about 10 after 8 in the morning. And this is a first meeting of the committee, so we'll be doing some housekeeping things at the end of the meeting. And I invite anyone who wishes to comment on the public record to please fill out a speaker card, and they're over here on this counter, as are some additional copies of the agenda. So we have one major item on the agenda, and I would like to ask Mr. Miller to come forward. I'm going to ask Mr. Miller to come forward, and we will, as committee members, speak with him first, and then I will call those members of the public who filled out public comment card. And again, if you're interested in speaking on the record, the cards are over there, and I invite you to speak. First, from the city clerk's office, if you could please read us the item.
Item number 1, CLA report relative to negotiating principles to be used in connection with the AEG proposal to build a stadium at the Los Angeles Convention Center and to bring an NFL team to the city.
And before you start, Mr. Miller, I just wanted to say a few quick things. I want to say thank you first to you and the chief legislative analyst for giving us a basis upon which to start strong negotiating principles based on putting the city in a very strong negotiating position by protecting the general fund and ensuring that no taxpayer funds are utilized to construct the event center / football stadium. I do hope that the city and AEG will be successful in modernizing the convention center and bringing a world-class event center that is also home to a National Football League team to downtown Los Angeles. Now, AEG and the city recently partnered on the Staples Center and LA Live. Both of these projects were complex deals that required extensive environmental review, economic analysis, and community input, and I believe that you were involved in those transactions also. Staples Center involved a very long-term ground lease on the city, much like the project that is proposed to us today, and I think it's important for us to understand how the city participated in the Staples Center project because it is a good model. And from a historic perspective, I think it will be very illustrative of how the city can take a strong position in economic development. So if you would provide us an overview not only of what is before us today, but summation, if you will, of the Staples Center transaction regarding the ground lease and bond financing that the city was involved in.
Sure. If I could, I'll start with your second question first, the history on Staples Center. In the late 90s, they did come to the city with a proposal to build an arena on convention center property. At the time, there was a North Hall at the convention center, which was on the corner of 11th and Fig. That was actually built as a temporary building at some point, but had been in use for some years. So they identified that site as a potential site for a stadium, or I'm sorry, an arena. Now, at the time, the CAO was Keith Comrie, the CLA was Ron Deaton. I was representing the CAO on that transaction. The point of that transaction was to potentially use the construction of an arena and having the Lakers move from Inglewood and the Clippers to Los Angeles. But it was to use that as a mechanism to be able to consolidate and acquire property and to try to make the LA Live project and a convention center hotel feasible. Excuse me. So the arena and the teams were not the goal in and of itself. It was to use that to further the public policy goals of trying to get the hotel built, which, as you know, did occur. The hotel opened about a year ago, and it's been a great help to the convention center. The city's participation in that, there was a total of about, as I recall, $70 million. That money was used to acquire property. The CRA did acquire property in some cases. It was condemnation, and it was the property to the north and to the east of the convention center. The city issued bonds. There were a variety of revenue sources in that. There was a $12 million grant from the CRA. There was some cash used from a convention center reserve fund, and the city issued bonds to purchase the property. Now, all of that money is being paid back through essentially ticket fees at Staples Arena and through incremental additional parking revenue at the convention center. That all but the $12 million, I'm sorry, is being paid back through ticket fees and through incremental parking revenues at the convention center, for events, the revenue that is generated by the arena itself.
And what was special about the $12 million?
Well, the $12 million ultimately was, again, a grant from the CRA. Initially, the proposal that came forward from the CAO and the CLA included credits against net new tax revenue to support the bonds. Similar to the mechanism before you today, very similar to what we used in Hollywood Highland, Pacoima Plaza, Chesterfield Square, District Square, Lowry's. It's a mechanism that we've used across the city in both big and small projects to reinvest net new revenue. At the time, there was some objection to those credits, so the deal was restructured. Those credits were taken off the table, but they were given $12 million in cash from the CRA.
And was there any obligation to ever pay it back?
No.
Do you know why, from a historical standpoint?
Well, again, it was the deal was struck with the CRA when the credits were taken off the table. The CRA came up with the funding. My recollection is there was some concern. I think the belief by Mr. Comrie and Mr. Deaton at the time was that the credits were more than sufficient, and the argument was giving credits for net new revenue that might be generated versus $12 million in cash.
What was the source of that money?
My recollection is it was the Central Business District bond reserves.
Now, what guarantees are in place, just so we can set the table on this, what guarantees are in place with respect to Staples Center, and how large was the letter of credit, if you remember?
Initially, the letter of credit was, I believe, around $74 million. That had been in place for many years. At some point, and this was maybe 8-9 years ago, again, it's up and running, it's generating the revenue, it's all being more than paid back through ticket fees and the parking revenue. So the city did agree that they would prepay the balance of the letter of credit. They wrote us a check, I believe, for around $17 million. So that letter of credit is no longer in place, but they still have the annual guarantee of the revenues.
So what happens in years when AEG is short, and what happens when we have not a windfall, but there are more revenues generated than anticipated?
If they're short 1 year, then they need to write us a check. If there's more revenues that are generated 1 year, then it would carry over to be a credit against situations in which they're short in the future. I don't recall them writing us checks, actually. It's been very successful.
Been very what?
Successful.
Okay. Is this a model that we are attempting to replicate in this situation?
Yes. Clearly, as the report indicates, one of the major principles is they're going to have to guarantee the debt service on the bonds. So to the extent that the private revenue sources and 50% of any net new tax revenue is not sufficient, then AEG is going to have to stand behind the balance on those bond payments. So there will be a guarantee. Exactly what that guarantee looks like and the size of that is going to be part of the negotiations.
So as the city moves forward on the bond discussion to construct a replacement convention center hall, it's very important, as we all agree, I'm sure, that we engage independent auditors selected by the chief legislative analyst and the chief administrative office to oversee and verify the project's finances to protect the city's interests. Now, I know that the CLA and the CAO are in the process of drafting language for, I believe, an RFP to select consultants, and I would like to know if this function can be assigned to either or department, or if the city needs to engage an additional auditor consultant.
Well, we're in the process of hiring 2 consultants. My office already put out an RFP. The responses are in. They're being evaluated. That's for a financial consultant with specific experience in stadium and sports, stadium development and sports team leases, et cetera. They're also going to be giving us expert advice on what that guarantee looks like from their experience in other jurisdictions, with other teams, with other stadiums, et cetera. Now, one issue did come up, and I do want to be clear, everyone was required to disclose any contractual relationships that might be a conflict. It's a relatively small world. We did get a good response, and we're certain we're going to be able to find someone. We wanted to make sure that there was no one with any conflict out there. The CAO is going to also hire an advisor reporting to them that will be working specifically on structuring any bonds that are issued for Pico Hall. And they will also be assisting, of course, in the nature of the guarantee, as will the city attorney on the legal issues.
Just for the sake of clarity, Pico Hall, you're referring to Pico Hall, I'm referring to West Hall in my notes. Are they one and the same?
I've started to refer to the replacement hall that's going to be built over Pico, connected to the South Hall as Pico Hall. West Hall will be, under the proposal, would be taken down. That would be the site of the stadium.
All right, it's going to cost about $350 million to replace the West Hall, which means the city will have to issue bonds in this amount and has to work with AEG on a guarantee that will fully service the debt without cost to the taxpayers of the city. I want to make a suggestion, and we can revisit this at the end of the meeting, amending principle number 6 for more specificity for the city negotiating team and more clarity for the city. And what the language I propose says, the city shall receive satisfactory assurances in the form of a guarantee, a letter of credit, or otherwise, that the developer will satisfy its obligation to fund any shortfall to the extent the revenues from numbers items 3 and 5 are insufficient to fund the debt service on the bonds issued to construct the new hall. I think that we need to understand that we're at the beginning of negotiation, the beginning of the discussion. This is going to be quite extensive and quite specific. Negotiating principles are a place to start. And it's not necessarily where we're going to end up, but I wanted to put that out there for your consideration so that we can include that at the start or the top of our conversation. We do have a track record in working with this developer. The modernization of the convention center and the construction of an event center, I believe, is projected to create 12,000 construction jobs, approximately.
Yes.
And about 10,000 permanent jobs. Those numbers alone are astonishing and make a strong argument for the redevelopment of the convention center. That's why this merits our full consideration. I also believe that large-scale projects like this one do believe in downtown Los Angeles. Now, the jobs created in this development will be available on a priority basis to City of Los Angeles residents, and new revenues from this project will be deposited into the general fund and will directly benefit the entire city by helping to pay for core services like updated traffic signals, removal of graffiti, police and fire services. Now, I don't know if we have this yet, Mr. Miller, but jobs data, that we have the projected jobs data, and I know we have historic data from Staples Center, and I don't know whether we have LA Live yet.
We have the construction jobs. It's been open for a year, so we're still looking at the permanent jobs on that.
Okay, so there was a local hiring program on both projects, and I'll ask you to give us a report back at some subsequent meeting to give us some information on that. And I'm also interested in making an additional amendment, I'll do it again at the end of the meeting, requesting the report back to, from the working group, not the committee, this is the committee where we actually vote, but there's a working group to report back to this committee, and I think it's in-house with, you're in the working group, CAO,
Yes.
On local hire statistics from Staples Center and LA Live, and something we need to know so we can use that as a basis for including that in this project also. And with that, why don't I let our vice chair go next, and then we also have Mr. Reyes and Mr. Martinez.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, public out there. It's good to see everybody in the room so early in the morning. There's just some general questions for you first before we go into the specific principles, which I'd like to go one by one. On some of them I have amendments as well. The report on February 16th, AEG submitted a proposal. Was that proposal submitted by AEG or by a limited liability corporate subsidy? Who actually submitted this report.
That was signed off by Mr. Lewicki for AEG.
So then, is this a limited liability corp or the general overall AEG?
Well, the proposal came from AEG. I would anticipate that the final corporate structure of the development, that's one of the issues that's going to come before you and play into the guarantee.
Okay, so then you'll let us know as we go through. It's one of the
Absolutely.
questions we just want to know as a backdrop. Is it legally possible for the city to enter into negotiations with the developer before the requirements of CEQA have been met?
Yes.
The report states that the CAO has issued and will issue an RFP. Ms. Perry explained all that. It was great. The question is that something you will award, or should that come before this committee or the council for a full briefing of those, or is it a ho-hum kind of a strategy to pick the group to do it? Because obviously you said the group has to have experience in convention centers, football stadiums, and hopefully the NFL.
Well, the authority was given for us to award. If the committee would like it to come back, that's certainly fine. That can happen.
Well, I just suggest to my colleagues it might be something we look at to see the differences between them, and as leadership people take that decision, because I think whoever is awarded it will be somebody that will be significant for all of us going forward. So I think we need to consider that, Madam Chair. And the last one is, will the financial analysis also include the costs, the risks, and the economic benefits to the city of the proposed stadium project in the city of Industry? Have we taken a look at that particular one? Will we analyze it at all to see how that one was put together and where that goes? I'll read it again to you. Will the financial analysis also include the costs, the risks, and economic benefits to the city of the proposed stadium project in the city of Industry? Like, what relationship would there be, not be? Is this totally us and they're different and we're happy being where we are and taking leadership? Is there anything we need to know about City of Industry strategy?
Well, we didn't contemplate evaluating the City of Industry proposal, and again, there is not an agreement to actually build a stadium, and there's not an agreement for a team there. To the extent that whatever's occurring in Industry is applicable to the city, certainly that would be included. But there hadn't been a contemplation to, in great detail, analyze the City of Industry proposal.
Well, I think we need to appreciate what they've done, just so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel on some of this, or appreciate how far down the road they've taken it. And just a general sense here, Madam Chair, everywhere I go in my district, people come up to me and ask me about this, what's going on, what's happening. And I hope as we develop our plan over the period of time that we have meetings in the evening and weekends that allows the public to participate in the meetings, interact with us, and be part of it. So when we put a schedule together, I hope we can have.
Yeah, we have
meetings
to
and
we have to
weekends.
discuss this, and I think we should discuss it on the public record, because I think we need to make an informed decision. If we have meetings outside of the scope of regular business hours, we do incur overtime costs. So we, as a committee, will have to decide whether and when we should incur those overtime costs so that we can go off-site. And I think that that's something that we all need to take a vote on, so that we all understand that as we go off-site, outside of 9 to 5, it's going to cost us money, and then we have to decide whether we all agree that that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay?
I agree with that. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to begin deliberations and instructions to our staff on this matter. Obviously, there's a very visible proposal, but more importantly, the convention center is owned by the people of Los Angeles, and I think it's important that we protect their assets and make sure that whatever we do as a city, certainly as policymakers, protects the public interest. And I want to go through some questions that I have based on the letter dated from AEG, signed off by President and CEO Tim Lewicki, and dated February 16th, and then also go over the document dated April 14th that was submitted to us on behalf of our CLA, Jerry Miller. I'll start with the CLA's letter. One of the first things that came to mind is when it comes to the word guarantee, the fact of the matter is the corporation that would be doing business with the city should we end up agreeing to this proposal. What is is it truly a guarantee, or is it just a business that, quite frankly, could perhaps file bankruptcy someday and we could eventually end up holding the entire bag?
Well, I will tell you that when we come back with a guarantee, I won't recommend it unless it's from it's some form of a letter of credit or a guarantee from a company that is beyond developing this project. Normally what happens is that they will establish an LLC to actually construct the project, but the only asset of the LLC will be the project. So I can tell you right now that that will not be sufficient. Now, exactly who it's going to come from, the amounts, et cetera, those are all issues that are going to have to be worked out once we actually look at the numbers. But we're very much aware of that, and we're going to make sure that there is a guarantee from someone who doesn't sink or swim on the stadium itself.
So, for example, was there some kind of guarantee of sorts when it came to Staples Center?
There was. Initially, there was a letter of credit.
Okay. So how did we move forward with that? What kind of signature, what backing did we get when it came to the Staples Center? Because it's my understanding, as was mentioned earlier, Staples Center is also on city land, correct?
It is, yes.
Okay. So what happened there? What satisfied us? What mechanism finally came to the table where they said, this is the guarantor, this is the signature that is going to back the project?
Again, initially, since there was no track record, it was a letter of credit from Bank of America. And then as the arena opened and as time went by and as their obligations were being paid off, the letter of credit was reduced. And then again, at some point, because it had a track record and was very successful, they essentially prepaid the city the balance of the letter of credit. I believe that number was about $17 million. So every year as the obligation was paid off, the LOC backing it went down.
And what was the gross amount at the beginning of that when it came to it? What reduced to 17 million? What was it at the beginning?
At the beginning, I believe it was 70. It was 73, I believe, at the
In
beginning.
excess of $70 million.
Yes.
So we're talking here a magnitude difference drastically higher when it comes to the subject at hand, the stadium.
For well, yeah, the
Stadium, the West Hall, the parking, all told, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, correct?
we are, yes.
Okay. So it obviously would require some kind of guarantor that is much larger than what we had to contemplate, or much more substantial than we had to contemplate on the Staples Center deal.
Yeah, yes. I mean, again, the numbers we're talking about are certainly larger here. I will say that the difference really is that the city, in that case, was stepping in to assist a private development. The focus here is really very different. What we're trying to do here is leverage private money to build a city facility. So again, part of this is all going to be incorporated into the negotiations, but the focus really is very, very different here. Because if you accept the premise that the West Hall has to be replaced, and to be competitive, if we need to build that replacement, then what are the city's options to get private funding to help build that?
Okay, thank you. On item number 5 on the 12 principles that were outlined in your document, it says the amount of demonstrated net new tax revenues to the city used to support bonds issued to construct Pico Hall shall be no more than 50% of the net new general fund tax revenues accruing to the city from the development. Can you describe to us what forms of new tax revenues, what categorical tax revenues come to the city as a result of a project like this?
It would be, well, property tax, in this case, possessory use tax, since it will continue to be our property and there will be a ground lease. So possessory interest tax, sales tax, business tax, utility tax, in essence, those are the sources that would be looked at.
Okay. And then also on item number 10, it says AEG will implement a public benefits program. As I mentioned earlier, the convention center and the ground that this is being contemplated to be built on is an asset of the entire city. What's the likelihood that we could actually, or we're going to embark on having a public benefits that doesn't just benefit, say, the surrounding area around Staples Center, but that it can benefit as much as possible all of the constituents of Los Angeles?
Well, again, the detail of the public benefits program, I left it intentionally broad because, I think with your guidance, we want a fair amount of flexibility on what that public benefits program looks like. Clearly, the revenues that are generated from this do go into the general fund and benefit citywide. Mm-hmm. In the past, the benefits have included such things as local and targeted hiring, and for example, if the first hiring would be targeted towards the local area, then it would go beyond the area to poverty census tracts and others. So it does expand, and certainly the intent was that it would benefit the entire city.
Okay. So, for example, with the Staples Center, they had a public benefits program.
Yes.
Okay. I can understand that the intensity of a lot of that public benefits occurred while the building of it, when it comes to local jobs, et cetera, which I'm sure we'll incorporate here. But beyond that, what other public benefits continue to be part of that public benefits plan that are being disseminated today?
Mr. Cardenas, I'm going to have to get back to you on that. It's been a number of years, so we're going to have to look at the status of the public benefits.
Well, if you could get back to us on that, because
sure.
It's really important, because in my opinion, when it comes, if you could give us a report on that.
Sure.
Madam Chair, to this committee, of course. And the reason why I say that, because when it comes to public benefits, there's really two components. One component is when you're building this hundreds of millions of dollars, in excess of $1 billion worth of infrastructure. It's always good to make sure that as much of the local community benefits from those jobs and that economic boost. Yet at the same time, this structure is going to be in use for decades to come. And what I'd like to see is that public benefits plan actually make sure that the next generation of children and the next generation of children who become adults, et cetera, and when they have children, as long as this facility is here on public land, that they can actually see and feel those benefits in that time, not just talk about it historically, how the public benefits benefited us in 2013, 14, and 15. On your points here, something struck me as kind of interesting is on item number 11, you said AEG will provide assurances to the satisfaction of the city that teams that are contracted to play in the NFL stadium are committed to the stadium for a period sufficient to ensure that the city's investment in Pico Hall is protected. I think that requires us to look into, especially as of late, when teams commit to being in a certain city at a certain site, are those 3-year commitments, 7-year commitments, 10-year commitments? I mean, I look at Green Bay, for example, that's an NFL team, but that's partially owned by the people, that team is. So they're probably going to stay there for generations. Yet at the same time, you see teams that used to play in San Diego are now playing somewhere else. As a matter of fact, 2 teams used to play in Los Angeles. They're both playing somewhere else. And conceivably, those teams could come back. Yet at the same time, they could leave as well. So my question is, what is it as of late that the NFL teams are committing to? Is it a 3-year average timeline, a 5-year, a 7-year, with some kind of ability to leave unilaterally? What are we looking at these days with the NFL?
Well, Mr. Cardenas, that's exactly the point of this, is to make sure that the teams are committed. This is one of the major issues where we do need the expert consultant to advise us on what other leases have looked like. Now, there has been some relocation, and we've done some, teams moving around. None of them, to my knowledge, have actually broken leases. So the terms of the agreements are going to be very, very important.
But what I mean is, I'm not talking about people being in litigation. I'm talking about what kind of agreements actually allow teams to leave after a period of time, and what is that likely time frame? Because the backdrop in my mind is, if we're going to be building and going to be on the hook for bonds to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars that have been enacted based on this transaction, are those bonds likely to go for 7 years, 13 years, 15 years? It sounds to me as though the bonds, at least the majority of the bonds, are going to actually be strung out beyond 20 years or so.
Yes, I would anticipate that they'll probably go out to between 20 and 30. Mm-hmm. And again, the whatever agreements there are with teams, we're going to have to be certain that there are hard and fast agreements that those teams stay as long as those bonds are outstanding.
That's going to be interesting.
Yes, it will.
Okay. Now, also when it comes to the category after the 12 points on your letter, the process and timing, you mentioned in here that you're looking for you put out an RFP for a financial consultant with expertise, first in stadium development and team leases, and second in convention center and transactions. And also, apparently you, according to your letter on April 4th, you submitted that publicly to hopefully be able to report with who the consultant may be within 2 weeks. It just so happens today's 2 weeks later. How's that coming along?
Actually, we received the responses on the 4th, and they're still being evaluated. So certainly within 2 weeks, we would be prepared to make a recommendation, and if the committee wishes, we can bring it back here.
Okay, 2 weeks from now.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought it was 2 weeks from April 4th.
No, we just received them April 4th. We're still evaluating.
Okay. So at the end of April, I presume, roughly beginning of May.
Yes.
Hopefully we'll have that. Now I want to ask some questions about the AEG letter, if you could help us understand perhaps what your understandings are of the intent. One of my first questions is, when was the West Hall built?
It opened in the late 70s, I think 71, 72, something like that. I meant the early 70s, 71, 72,
Okay.
yes.
So for generic purposes, it's pretty much has met its lifespan. Obviously, it's still standing, it's structurally sound or what have you, but it is conceivable that this timeline that we're in now is a good time to actually look at either revamping it or raising it and building a new facility.
Yes.
Okay. It also says that the tourism industry, in the second paragraph of their letter, toward the end, it talks about $1 billion in facilities is what they're proposing to enact, and also that the tourism industry has become one of the region's most significant economic sectors. That being the case, let's not forget that we're in a very, very strong negotiating position, being that it is our land. We can't take credit for the sunny weather in Los Angeles, but we can take credit for the fact that this is the second largest media market in the country that doesn't have an NFL team. So that being the case, let's not forget that AEG is definitely motivated on attracting and becoming a part of that economic opportunity. So I have some questions toward when it comes to transaction overview. On item number 2F on the AEG letter, which is labeled page number 1 at the bottom, the new parking structures will be owned, hopefully it'll just be a few more minutes, Madam Chair. The new parking structures will be owned by the city, and this caught my attention, but will be operated by the developer to ensure coordination with surrounding event uses. How does that strike you? Are we likely to be able to work out a deal with that being intact, or is that something that is very likely out of the question?
In my view, that's one of the issues that's subject to negotiation. In my view, really, everything in the AEG proposal is subject to negotiation. Their desire is that they operate it. That decision has not been made.
Sure. At this time, Madam Chair, if I could call the head of the convention center up to ask him some questions. Good morning, Mr. Abbasi. How are you?
Good morning.
Good. When it comes to operating of, for example, in this case, the parking structures, currently who operates our parking structures right now?
Currently, it's the Los Angeles Convention Center parking operations that operates the parkings at all our garages.
But we do have agreements with AEG when it comes to the Staples Center, LA Live, when it comes to a certain amount of parking spaces, et cetera. We have worked out agreements with them,
Certainly.
correct?
And those agreements are working very well, particularly in 2005. There was an agreement that was put together by the city and AEG to lease some of our parking spots to AEG during their events when we don't have events at the convention center.
Okay, thank you. Jerry, there's something that struck me as again, these are the wishes of AEG, certainly not agreements that we've agreed to. But when you look at 3A on signage, it says the developer or its affiliate will pay annual payments to the city in exchange for signage rights substantially consistent with the agreement previously approved by the city. Which agreement are they referring to?
There was an agreement that was sent forward, it's got to be at least 2 years now, maybe even longer than that. It was a signage program really throughout the district, the convention center, on the South Hall and the West Hall. The council did approve that agreement. There was, in essence, what it called for is AEG to foot the entire bill and take all the risk on the capital costs to construct the signage. They guaranteed the city $2 million a year, and then there was a revenue sharing beyond that. So this is, again, one of those issues that we're going to have to look at very carefully, and we need the consultant to come in and give us some sense of the value of these.
Madam Chair, what I'd like to see take place is there are, in fact, specific consultants when it comes to that issue and that issue only when it comes to signage. And it's in my personal opinion that was a very favorable, although legal and appropriate agreement that we agreed to and passed by the council and ratified by the City of Los Angeles, and it was extremely advantageous to AEG. And I'm certain that they would definitely like to just model the next generation of signage modeled on that one. However, it's my understanding, Jerry, that we did not, at that time, enlist an expert specifically on the issues of signage and how to negotiate, especially the new kinds of signage that are much more lucrative than the old kind of signage of the old days. We did not engage a specific expert on that, did we?
Actually, we did, yes.
That's an expert on signage specifically?
Yes.
Who was that?
I'm going to have to check the name. It was an individual. We got several names actually through LA Inc. and some of their connections throughout the country, including Times Square. And we did have a consultant working with us to try to value that signage. And it was really that consultant that proposed the revenue sharing aspect of the deal.
Okay. Well, hopefully we got a great deal out of there, especially since they would like to model it after that. But at the same time, if we could instruct the CLA to make sure that we engage a specific consultant on that aspect, because just looking at the naming rights of the stadium in and of itself, that's what you call exposure, and they're already talking about a $700 million to $1 billion naming rights when it comes to the field. Now, obviously, that's an opportunity for a really good agreement where AEG could be happy and the city can not leave any money on the table. Now, when it comes to signage 3, item B, the developer will retain all signage and naming rights for the event center. The city will grant developer additional exterior signage rights on the event center, the existing convention center, and the new parking structures to support event center naming rights and sponsorship agreements. Again, along those lines, obviously, they wouldn't spend that much time outlining their wishes if it wasn't such a lucrative opportunity there. But I'd say a lucrative opportunity perhaps for the people of Los Angeles and also AEG. So once again, we need to be careful not to leave anything on the table. Something else caught my attention, Jerry, on 3, the second bullet point. Toward the end there, it says percentage to be determined, but will be in the range of 3 to 5%.
Okay.
When it comes to the sources for the repayment of the city bonds. Do you have any feelings about the 3 to 5%? Did that catch your attention yet, or you're not in those details yet?
Well, it's we're yes and no. We're not in those details yet. Actually, I believe that the ticket fee at Staples now is in the 4 to 5% range. So I think it was patterned after that. But what it's really going to come down to is what is the hole that has to be met, and where is the money coming from?
Okay. Something also caught my attention. They have a footnote, number 1, where it refers to that 3 to 5%, and it says if Staples Center ground lease is extended, additional admissions fees generated at the Staples Center beyond current scheduled expiration of the fee would also be available to apply toward the debt service on the bonds. But yet, if the Staples Center agreement is extended, that's a transaction previously. And if we were to extend that, why would we want to commit those future increment of dollars to the bond debt?
Well, again, that's going to be, where we end up on this is going to be part of the negotiations. But the concept here is that the ticket fee on Staples was in place as long as the agreement the financial agreement was in place. So that is set to go away, I believe. That was a 25-year deal, so that's set to go away in around 2022. So the idea would be to extend that and generate additional money to the city. That's the concept here, but it's going to be part of the negotiations.
Mm-hmm. And then also, when it comes to 3B, toward the end, it says the excess will be credited against any future shortfall obligations of the developer. Let me read that sentence in its entirety. If the above revenue streams exceed the debt service paid by the city on the bonds in any given year, the excess will be credited against any future shortfall obligations of developer. That seems a bit open-ended. So, for example, if we have a windfall in 2017, and this is in existence, and all of a sudden, all we're doing is allowing that money to sit there, and it only benefits AEG's ability to pay in subsequent years. And also, it doesn't refer in any way that that will be a 3-year rolling period where eventually the monies goes back to the city in excess of the requirement to pay the bonds, et cetera. So, again, it just reminds me that we cannot forget, although AEG has done some tremendous developments that have benefited jobs and the economics of the downtown of Los Angeles, yet at the same time, we can never forget their objective is to increase their bottom dollar first and foremost. If we all benefit from that adjunct, I'm sure they're happy for us. But the bottom line is everything that they're going to propose, everything that they're going to write is going to be from their perspective and their perspective only. So I just want to remind all of us that again, Tim Leiweke is a fine gentleman. I'm sure he's spoken to many of us about this issue and many others. Again, they've done some great work to attract tourism to downtown Los Angeles, which is all about their business and only their business, really, at the end of the day, if it's on their land and it's private development through and through. But this is we're talking about a development that is not a private development only. It's a development that what they're talking about is the city of Los Angeles land, the assets that belong to the city. So again, little things like that catch my attention, such as an open-ended statement, such as all the excess revenue will go ahead and benefit. In that case, it would only benefit the reduction of what AEG has to take out of their pocket every single year. Thank you.
Mr. Reyes.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning, colleagues, folks. We're a good hour into this now, so hopefully you have your coffee. But I wanted to address, and in negotiating principles, there are two items that speak to benefit and impacts. In the past 10 years, we've been able to experience LA Live and how it performs, both in its circulations, traffic, how people move about, ancillary impacts on surrounding properties. But unfortunately, from my perspective, the Harbor Freeway became like a cement curtain. We did not really see the physical changes that I think one might have anticipated, but I applaud them on a lot of their social and philanthropic programs. That has been exemplary. But I think today we have another opportunity to assess and evaluate those impacts in the context of this discussion of new proposal. I think it's significant that we should prioritize a 360-degree perspective so that the areas around this facility are truly assessed for the levels of hardship and or opportunities that can be identified. Now, I say this understanding that the planning staff has been cut by 40%. I say this knowing that we want to expedite and be efficient in how we process this documentation. So, Madam Chair, one of the recommendations I wanted to make to you and this committee is if we would consider having one ad hoc committee just on the planning and land use issues, that we provide a forum in which we can raise the concerns that we've been hearing in our community, given the levels of opportunity and the constraints that are inevitable when you have this level of a project at this scale. I think one of the, and I was looking at the documentation, we're asking for an RFP for a financial consultant with the expertise first in stadium development and team leasing. But perhaps we should consider, have a report back from the CLA, if it would behoove us to have an RFP for a land use and planning consultant that falls into transportation issues, that falls in some of the impacts on surrounding properties, so that we can move this discussion and get to the best and highest use when it comes to land use decisions, both for the property owner, the city, and for the surrounding stakeholders who are going to be concerned about the traffic and issues of bottlenecking. And I'm a little hesitant to say this, but I know the freeway is a huge, I mean, if you look at the map and you look at the designs, the freeway is, you just can't help but notice how profound it is in its physical presence. Do we dare, in this current state crisis, ask state officials to give us their recommendations? What role can they play? Because now we're speaking to the issue of on-ramps, off-ramps, ingress, egress, and everything we do, they're going to say, well, the state has to approve it. The state has to approve it. Do we wait for them to respond to us? Do we bring them early in the process and get that reality check? Do they even have the time? Do they have the resources? Is it something that we want to fold into this? Will it bog us down? I'm not sure about that.
I think we should bring Caltrans into this discussion. They've already closed off the off-ramps on both sides of the 110 freeway in the area that would be affected.
Right.
I think people need to know what their plans are and timeline and.
Construction issues.
Right.
So, Mr. Miller, do you think that's something we should fold in, or maybe just assess it to see what recommendations there are, given their realities?
Yes, actually, and I referenced in the report, when we get to the transportation issues in the EIR, we do want to engage Caltrans and make sure that the freeway issues and the major, state highway issues are addressed.
Great. In terms of understanding the assumptions of the initial EIR, and I know that went pretty quick because it did. I mean, just the way it happened. Being able to understand what that, what those assumptions actually, what was realized. Did they actually evolve the way we thought? Were the impacts that we recommended, did they work? That type of analysis is something I would like to see in this process. And perhaps we can fold that in that one land use planning meeting. So I would be asking, I guess, Transportation Department, Planning Department to look at the physical impacts to see where we're at and understand the bottlenecking, understanding traffic backups, and looking at alternative means of stimulating that circulation.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, we've convened, there are two groups. There's the negotiating team and there's the larger working group. We've convened a meeting of the working group, and it did include DOT, it did include planning, it includes fire, it includes LAPD, engineering, et cetera. And what I would anticipate is if the committee is going to have sort of focus sessions on issues as you discuss, we would bring them in and talk about that exactly. But they are fully engaged, and we recognize that those issues are going to have to be worked out.
Right. And somehow we need to break down that cement barrier. We have to fold in the land use impacts that are existing west of the freeway, in as much as, the areas that are in that second ring of concentric influence in the southern portion, fold that in together, because we've got the traffic from the local universities, you've got all the other venues that are popping up, and on day of events, we have to figure out how to mitigate and enhance our circulation. So that would be the limit of my request, and see if we could move on. My colleagues are doing a great job covering all the other details.
Okay, and when we're done, we'll go circle back and then make sure we have everybody's concerns on a list to give to Mr. Miller. Okay, Mr. Labange.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Just for the record, I have over 30-year relationship with the NFL as a cameraman assistant with NFL Films. So I just want to get that on the record.
Of interest, Tom.
I haven't got a paycheck in this century. It was last century. But I just wanted to let that know. Many things about football are real important. It's really important. And what you said, Mr. Reyes, I just want to compliment on the 360-degree view of this. It's very important from where Staples is, where the LA Live is. If this project is going to stand, it's going to stand, just as we're all breathing in this room today. But if it doesn't happen, it's for the right reason. If it's for the right reason, it will happen. But there's many challenges. And as Vince Lombardi had 6 basic plays, Jerry Miller, when they were the great champions in the 60s, he had 6 basic plays. And our 6 basic things, starting with, is the community impact. What is going to be the community around? As Mr. Reyes just spoke, 360. And also on the other side, there's a lot of people who are living in buildings downtown, and there are noise impacts when there's celebrations. And so that's community impact is key. Congestion on the freeways is key. The 1965 Santa Monica Freeway was opened, and it's still the same, no change since 1965 of that interchange. The Harbor Freeway now is getting changed a little, but there's no drastic change for those confluences there. The transit way that we all hailed that ends at Adams Boulevard, that has to be thought of and continued, not just into the center city, but possibly beyond into Dodger Stadium. The Harbor Freeway Transit Way must be looked at in such a way. Also, I think it's real important on the convention center, what impact it is. Is the building going to be started immediately to be ready to when the other one's torn down, or what's the gap going to be? Because there's a lot of convention business that may be offset that we have to look at. And the Coliseum, the wonderful Coliseum. And Madam Chair, if we go back, us 5 members of council go back to the council of the 1920s, when in 1923 they said we're going to build a Coliseum in the Exposition Park Historic District of the Agriculture District is what it was. And then they later expanded it for the 32 games. That's very important. What impact it has on the Coliseum, because we're owners of that, the city, county, and state. And also, speaking of the Coliseum and having vision, in 21 years, it's going to be the centennial of the 32 games. And I would hope, as I've asked council before, that Los Angeles compete for the bid for the 1932 games, an anniversary of the 100th anniversary of the Olympics that were here. That question Mr. Miller put in, if we're in this process with this stadium, if we do have an Olympic Games, we want total cooperation in that. We want to write in that there may be an Olympic Games here again. And what made the 84 games successful was the multitude of venues, not just ours, the Coliseum, but the state colleges as well. The cost implications, as Mr. Rosendahl has spoke of so many times. But the investment is key. If we do it right, it will make a lot of sense to many, many, many people. And the core of downtown. I truly believe in the 1960s, and I want to be a little historic here, there was a thought that SC would leave. SC would go to down where Irvine eventually built its campus, or up to Malibu. SC's committed billions of dollars in rebuilding their campus and expanding. SC has been the economic engine, the largest employer, private employer. And that is important to look at what the university thinks on this issue here. Lastly, to be more specific on football, I believe in open-air stadiums. I believe in playing in the elements. I think it's real important. Although the stadium in Phoenix is a closed stadium, and they did that for heat reasons, but also they found it as an advantage for their home team. But I like open-air stadiums. I think the elements are real important to be played in, and on natural turf, which is real key. And also, I believe on community benefits. Does 1% of the arts apply to this? Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Okay, I want 1% for the athletics too. Would I say that? There's many programs for young people that could be funded, like the LA 84 Olympic Games with their foundation. That has funded many good programs, but I want 1% for athletics too. So that would be real important, so children could get to the games. The average price of the NFL is a very expensive ticket. I hope we could work with a community benefit program. So let's say that 250 tickets per event could go to boys clubs, girls clubs, YMCAs, rec centers throughout the county, so that kids could see the NFL, because I think it had. I remember as a child going to the, it was preseason, but when the Dallas Cowboys played the Rams, it was Rams for kids, and you got to get to a game in a very special way. So those are just some of the opening remarks. Basically, we want to make sure we're transparent, that people know if this is a good thing, it's going to be done properly, and it's going to be a 60-year project. I think Mr. Cardenas spoke of when teams move. The Rams came here from Cleveland in '51, and they played at the Coliseum. They left and went to Anaheim in the late '70s, in the early '80s, and then the Raiders came down, and then they went back. But I think there's no better place. I want to make this no better field. There's never going to be a better field than the floor of the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. I just wanted to say that from an athletic standpoint for its history and the turf that it is. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Labange. Now, we're going to, Mr. Rosendahl is going to say a few things while Mr. Cardenas is still here because he has to go to public safety. Then I'm going to go to the cards, and then we'll go through the list of requests to the CLA and follow-ups, and hopefully I'd like to get some consensus on a meeting schedule before we leave today. Mr. Rosendahl, why don't you take a few minutes?
Great.
Concerns on the record.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I also appreciate the committee we have here. Mr. Cardenas was extremely thorough and went deep into it. Mr. Reyes, with his planning background, and Mr. Labange's cheerleading background. I think the
football background. You may have been a cheerleader, Brother Bill.
No. I'm a player, baby. Quarterback. Okay. All right, folks. All right, look, here, I'm going to go through the principles, and I have 4 amendments I'd like to make to various principles and comments on some of the other. Principle 1, the city's existing general fund base will be fully protected. I want to amend that to say the city's existing and future general fund base will be fully protected. Do I have a second for that? Second. Okay, thank you. Can we hold that like that at the moment? There shall be no public money for the NFL stadium. On this particular one, I got a question. Does that mean that no public monies will be used for infrastructure improvements around the stadium and event center? I would like to be sure that this is the case. In that regard, I would put an amendment. There shall be no public money for the NFL stadium or the downtown event center, and public money will not be used to subsidize or incent the stadium and event center, or otherwise make infrastructure improvements that the city would not have ordinarily made. Have a second to that amendment?
I'll second it. Just to have
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. That's okay. That's great. Principle 3, there must be substantial private funding to support any bond issued to construct Pico Hall. Question, what models for public-private partnership are we looking at to determine whether the level of private funding is sufficient? That's the first question. The second question is, this principle implies that in addition to private funding to support the bonds, there will be some level of public funding to support the bonds. Why? Okay, those are 2 questions that I want answers to. Principle 4.
Do you want them answered now, or do you want them to report back?
Report back with that. Yeah,
Okay.
I'd like you to have that opportunity to do that. Principle 4, any tax revenues used to support bonds issued to construct Pico Hall shall be from demonstrated net new tax revenues generated by the development and not come from the existing general funds. I do not agree that we should be supporting bonds at all with tax revenues, new or existing. And I want to go on the record on that. Principle 5. The amount of demonstrated net new tax revenues to the city used to support bonds issued to construct Pico Hall shall be no more than 50% of the net general fund tax revenues accrued to the city for development. That is Principle 5. Why should we sacrifice any net new tax revenues? What is the justification for that? That's a question I want to report back. Now, also Principle 6. AEG shall fully guarantee in a form satisfactory to the city the debt services on the bonds used to construct the new hall in the event that the revenues generated through numbers 3 and 5 above are insufficient to fully support the bonds. The question on this one is, how can we be sure that the new AEG Event Center will not actually harm the business of the LA Convention Center? Might it not cannibalize the business and attract some events that might otherwise go to the convention center? How do we protect against those losses, quantify them, and get repaid for them? Report back on that. Now I have an amendment for principle number 7. The city shall retain fee ownership of the property on which the NFL stadium will be built. The property will be ground leased for a period not to exceed 55 years, and the city shall receive fair compensation for the value of the ground lease. That's Principle 7. The question is, Who will determine the fair market value of the ground lease? And can someone give me an estimate of what the amount appears to be now? And the second question on that, which will lead to an amendment, if the city retains ownership of the property, why shouldn't we get a portion of the fees for naming rights for the stadium built on that property? My amendment to that one is this. Add an additional principle stating that due to the city's ownership of the property on which the stadium is built, the city shall receive a fair portion of the naming rights. You have a second for that?
Well, I have a question for that. I think it's worth to discuss. I think we should discuss it. I
Okay.
don't know.
Have a second on that?
Let me ask a second. Madam Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Rosendahl brings up many good points that all should be thoroughly discussed. If I second it, I don't want to box myself in because there's some, like 1% of the arts or 1% of the athletes, or athletics, let me get that right, 1% of the athletics may be that component that would overcome that. So I think we need to discuss that. I think we should discuss all that, Bill.
Okay, all right. With that in mind, my point basically is if we own the land and we're letting them use the land, why shouldn't we get a piece of the naming rights? And that's the question.
You're
You can get an
asking
answer
for
on
a
that.
report back.
Sure.
And I think that's fine.
Okay, now I'm just going to go through quickly just a couple of more, folks, okay? Let me just go to number 9, because I have an amendment on that, because I know that people want to move on. Principle number 9, AEG shall complete an environmental impact report, an EIR, which shall fully analyze the impact of the proposed development. That's great. Question, as worded, does this allow the developer to complete an EIR while also obtaining legislative protection from any litigation regarding the adequacy of the EIR, thereby making the EIR meaningless? My amendment to this one is this. AEG shall complete an environmental impact report which shall fully analyze the impact of the proposed development, and AEG shall not seek or receive legislative protection from litigation regarding the adequacy of the EIR. In other words, they've got to be out there and they've got to deal with the reality of that and not have any legislation that protects it. I don't know, does anybody want to second that one or just have that for discussion? Okay, that's cool. All right, that's great. That's just great. Okay, all right, fine, all right. Okay, let me just, well, there's a few more, but let me just go through, they're not amendments, but Tony's going to be leaving.
These are just instructions to the CLA anyway. We're not going to vote,
Okay.
so it's okay.
Okay, let me then go through a couple more since he's left. Principle number 11, AEG will provide assurance to the satisfaction of the city that terms that are contracted to play in the NFL stadium as committed to the stadium for a period of sufficient to ensure the city's investment in Pico Hall. As Tony Cardenas mentioned, would this require a contract with a particular team, or how do we deal with that issue of a team coming here? Basically, the question is, what are the ways through which the city can assure that the teams are contracted with to play in the stadium for a period of time sufficient to ensure the city's investment in Pico Hall is protected? Wouldn't that require a contract of some length? And we'd need to hear back on that. And the last one was Principle 12. The NFL stadium must include a roof and be designed in such a fashion as to provide viable additional event and exhibit space for the convention center. The question is, why are we focusing on 1 million square feet of exhibit space while there's an improvement over which we have not now? Isn't it still a far cry from what we need to be truly competitive? The question is, can someone name 2 or 3 events that might be willing to move from their current location to Los Angeles, where space would be split between a traditional convention center and a football stadium? That's just another one for a report back on. Okay,
Can I
thank
add
you.
one thing, Ms. Perry?
Yeah.
My coach, Coach Davis, said championships are won by great defenses and kicking games. So our point is we have to be a great defense for the people of Los Angeles. And as I said earlier, if it doesn't work, we punt.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Labange. All right.
As long as we're players.
All right, why don't we begin with the cards. Before I start calling names, I want to put on the record that our chief legislative analyst created a website for information about the committee's work and the stadium proposal. And the address, or let me just read this, it's the Ad Hoc Committee on Downtown Stadium and Convention Center Renovation. The website is downtownstadium.lacity.org. That's downtownstadium.lacity.org. You can email your questions to downtownstadium@lacity.org. Email downtownstadium@lacity.org. Now, as for, I'm just going to take all the cards at once. They're all for item. We actually have 2 items on the agenda today, and they're both informational. So we'll give instructions. No vote will be taken. But let's call 4 people up at a time. Rachel Torres, William Raleigh. Is William here? Yes. Come on up. Shamari Davis and Kevin Bass. All right. Rachel, why don't you go first?
Good morning. My name is Rachel Torres. I'm a research analyst for Unite Here, the Hotel Workers Union. On behalf of the 20,000 hospitality workers throughout Los Angeles County, we'd like to express our strong support for Farmers Field. We have a long-standing and proud relationship with AEG in creating good jobs at the Staples Center, the JW Marriott, and the Ritz-Carlton hotels. Indeed, Farmers Field and the updated convention center is a game changer that could propel 5 new hotels in the area with good jobs and make Los Angeles a true destination center for conventions. This has far-reaching effects for all of our members, including housekeepers along the Figueroa corridor who face the devastating recessionary impacts of reduced hours, layoffs, and the increased cost of living. Therefore, we wish to express our strong support for this project. Thank you.
Thank you. William Raleigh.
Yes, good morning. I'm here representing IATSE Local 33. We're headquartered in Burbank, California. We've been around as stagehands for about 115 years now. We have a long-standing relationship with AEG as a great employer. They provide a huge number of jobs for the members of our organization currently. And I suspect moving forward with what's being contemplated here, that if this is in fact approved, it will provide scores of other new jobs for our members. I would tell you at this point that we heartily approve of this project and support this project, and will continue to be seen here on an ongoing basis, doing the same thing over and over again. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Shamari Davis.
Good morning, councilmen and quarterbacks. My name is Shamari Davis. I'm a business rep for IBEW Local 11 Electricians Union. And we are in favor of this project, represent about almost 8,000 electricians in LA County. And we're very confident with AEG. We've worked with them on LA Live. They've been a very responsible developer. And we're also confident that the city council members in the city of LA will do their due diligence to make sure it's good for the city as well as good for the workers here in Los Angeles County. I think this project also creates hope. Hope for the revitalization of downtown LA, hope for the people of LA to thrive, the city of LA, for work and coming out of the recession into something that's much bigger than ourselves. We all know that if we build a better heart, we will have a better body. If we build a better heart of a city, we'll have a better city and a thriving city. So we want to continue to make that come to fruition. In this case, LaBonge, we want to take the punt and we want to run it back for a touchdown. There you go. That's what we're going to do here. Go LA Lightning, that's the new name. I'm just coining it. But we're very in favor of the project and we want to see it move forward. Thank you very much.
Kevin Bass.
Good morning, committee. My name is Kevin Bass. I'm the government affairs representative for the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. We have several thousand members from basically the Bakersfield border down to San Diego. And we've had a long history with AEG also, and it's been nothing but positive. We've been working with them a lot on this project, and we look forward to continued working with them on this. And I mean, personally, I don't see anything negative on this project. I like football. We need another football team. That's one, get that out of the way. But also, it's going to bring thousands of jobs, both in the building and sustained jobs on an ongoing basis. And it's also going to build the city and bring more business to right where we need it, downtown, and to put this city in the position it's supposed to be in, this held parallel with New York. So, again, we support this project, and you'll be seeing me down here also. Thank you.
Thank you. Ron Miller, Ted Fickrey, Gary Cook, and Bill Delvac.
Good morning, Council.
Morning.
I'm Ron Miller with the LA Orange County Building and Construction Trades. We represent 140,000 construction craft men and women. And we have also a long-standing relationship with AEG, but also a lot of other developers in the city. Any of the big buildings in the city, the building trades has been there. And we are the people to come to put the local community to work. We have a standing record. You can check it out. We're in the middle of a $20 billion project labor agreement with LAUSD. We have numbers of putting the local community to work that you can bank on. The record is there. Also, what this project is going to do is you have a convention center sitting there that the big conventions can't come to because you don't have enough hotel rooms. And as a young lady before me said, there's 4 or 5 hotels lined up waiting to come here. One of them is going to announce tomorrow at a press conference. You got a couple thousand hotel rooms in the city right now that are viable for conventions. You need about 6,000 to be a major player. So we need to get this thing done. I was lucky enough to be one of the negotiators with the City of Coalition Unions. I've been up with the CAO for the last couple of months talking, and the City of LA needs new revenue streams. This is one of them. Right? Thank you.
Ted Fickrey.
Hi, Ted Fickrey, Chief Legal and Development Officer with AEG. First, I'd like to thank the committee for taking the time to consider this project and this transaction. We look forward in the coming weeks and months in working with the city, this committee, the negotiating team, and others as we try to advance this project. With respect to the principles that were in the CLA's report and that have been discussed this morning, we're heartily supportive of the city enunciating important principles. We think the initial proposal we put forth is largely consistent with most of the principles on that list. There are certainly some principles that are on the list that were either not addressed in our proposal or perhaps were addressed in a slightly different fashion, and we welcome the opportunity to engage in negotiation and try to seek resolution on those points that would be satisfactory to both parties. There's certainly a lot of complexity and issues and details that have not been addressed yet, and we think it'll take time to do that. That said, we do feel confidently that the proposal and the general framework that we put on the table is fair and one that we believe ultimately is advantageous not only to the developer but also to the city. We think it's important this project make financial sense, and when there's discussion about naming rights and other revenues, we'd like to remind the committee that we're making and contemplating making more than $1 billion investment, and it's going to be critical for us to make sure that we've protected important revenue streams that will ultimately underwrite that investment. Just a couple of quick things I want to address that came up. The team lease, there was much discussion about that. We fully agree with the principle that the team commitment ultimately needs to be a long-term commitment and one that mirrors the financial commitments that the city would be making in this deal, and certainly we will have significant private financing, and there will be many parties, including ourselves, that are interested in knowing there's a long-term commitment from the team. Public benefits, we certainly anticipate working closely with the community and having a very ambitious program like the one that's currently in place. If there are other questions, I'd be happy to entertain them from committee members.
Thank you. Gary Cook?
Yes, thank you. Councilman, I really appreciate the chance to come before you, tell you how much I appreciate your leadership in this with the committee and how much it means to my members who live and work in the area. Whether they follow football or not, this is a great a great moment in the city of Los Angeles to move forward for great new revenue streams to the city, a profit for the AEG Corporation, to where everybody in this area will be a winner, the residents and the two stakeholders. Thank you.
What union? You didn't say?
UA Plumbers Local 78.
Thank you.
Mr. Delvac.
Honorable Council Members, Bill Delvac of Armbruster, Goldsmith & Delvac on behalf of AEG. I'd like to join Mr. Fickray in thanking the committee for the opportunity. I'm primarily here to address questions on the land use and entitlement side, and we welcome the questions the committee has already asked. I had the pleasure of representing, at the time, LA Arena Company before there was an AEG, and then AEG on LA Live. So I'm very familiar with the land use and entitlement processes that have occurred to date. And in fact, I had the opportunity to be involved directly in the negotiation of the community benefits agreement. Councilmember Reyes, I would like to assure you that we are very mindful of the land use issues. This is a large, complex, although in some ways relatively straightforward project. We do believe that the parking and circulation transportation issues are very key. We believe that the ability to coordinate events is going to be the key to that. We are already mindful that we need to make suggestions about and then work with the community on a neighborhood protection plan for the neighborhoods to the west. And being a resident of one of the neighborhoods immediately to the east, South Park, we're also mindful that we need to understand that we're building in a neighborhood which actually now exists because there is a Staples Center or LA Live. That residential neighborhood grew up around the development of LA Live. And so we are very mindful of those neighbors. On the community benefits and on the EIR, we do welcome the opportunity to report back to the committee on those success stories. We believe that LA Live's parking and circulation plan exceeded expectations, and again, we do appreciate the opportunity to report back. On community benefits, it was a wide-ranging agreement. In fact, I've been pleased to know that nationally it's cited as probably the earliest leading example of a community benefits agreement. I've been invited to speak to the Bar Association on it. It provided for park and recreations, facilities and needs assessment, living wage, first source hiring, local hiring and job training, additional affordable housing. Those were all impacts involved in that project. We believe that this is a different type of project with different issues, but we look forward to working with the council and the committee.
AEG, one thing real quick.
Yeah. we got one
Okay,
more.
I know, but on the AEG, Counselor, you say go for a team. Could you follow the New York project? It's in New Jersey, where they have the Jets and the Giants play there. Could we go after two teams, both AFC and NFC?
We've certainly contemplated the possibility of two teams. There are challenges associated with that. I think we're...
But you're so successful with the Clippers and the Lakers.
Well, as we
except
proceed...
last night.
Certainly, as we proceed with the planning stages of this project, we will make sure that that's
Be
an
open to
option.
it. Be open to it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Now, we have a very special guest in our midst today. The elder statesman, former councilman, Nate Holden, representing the 10th District, who will now give us a lesson, a teachable moment, on what to do and what not to do.
Well, it's special.
Very special.
It's very special.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, I've been very impressed with the questions that have been raised regarding this project. You're right on target. Mr. Cardenas highlighted the most critical points, raised questions that should be answered about how viable economically this would be for the city of Los Angeles and its taxpayers, and whether or not we're leaving everything on the table. Now, I must tell you that when we did the Staples Center, we floated a bond which was supposed to be paid down by AEG, and after I left the council, I understand they transferred the responsibility for paying down that bond to the city. That allowed them to use our bond rating, which now is in jeopardy, and they can use that money which not would in any way obligated their bond rating ability or financing ability for future projects, and they use that money to do other things with. And let me just tell you that this project is going to cost the taxpayers. It's a business, public project as defined in Mr. Lawicki's report. The question is, they getting everything on the table, signage rights, et cetera, et cetera. And they're saying that if we float the bond for $350 million, we would pay down that bond indebtedness with property, with the sales taxes and parking revenue taxes. And yet they say they want to be able to control all of the parking and manage that and give us the profit from it. But it has to be compatible with the other activities that's going on in this area, which means the convention cannot plan for long-term convention. When you want to get a big convention here, you're going to need, you will need a lot of time in advance to say to certain businesses, you can have a convention here in Los Angeles. That may very well conflict with what's happening at Our Live, may well conflict with what's happening at the stadium. And so therefore, they'll be limited or denied the right to put on that convention by virtue of this agreement that you are now entertaining. So, which therefore means the bond indebtedness for the convention which exists, when I left it was $1.2 billion. It was $1.2 billion now been paid down. That has to be paid off by the city still. Yet it's a joint powers agreement between the county and the city. Notwithstanding all that, just two other points. I'm sure you're going to look into those things. Number one, I was chairman of transportation for 12 years here in the city on that committee. And I got to tell you, try going to a Monday night football game, peak hours between 4 and 8 here and at the interchange, and bringing in 50, 60,000 people. You know, how are you going to mitigate that? There's no tailgates. The Coliseum is the best deal, you understand that. Okay, so that's a real problem as well. So I would say to you that it's good to bring a football team here. I want a football team. I have news conferences in front of the Coliseum say, we've got to have football. But until we're putting the cart before the horse, there's no football team, there's no contract. If you sign a contract for 50 years leasing the property, there's nothing going to be on the table to pay down that indebtedness, that bond indebtedness, if a football team don't come, if they come in and leave early. You see? So I would say to you that you got to make sure there's a fiduciary responsibility that if we have a team for 50 years, they're going to be here for 50 years, they're going to pay down that bond indebtedness. And there's no guarantee that it could happen with the way they move around nowadays. So I just wanted to share that with you. I think that you're right on, you ask great questions, and I'm sure that you make sure that the taxpayers of this city will be protected in the final analysis. One final statement. On the Staples Center, Joel Wax gave Lawicki $12.5 million of the CRA money, cut the deal, and he got nothing for it. So you know you got to be careful. And I was out of town. I came back and said, Joel, why did you do that? He just gave you hee-haw. But I talked to Lawicki about it. You shouldn't have taken that money. He said, Joel gave it to us. So, I mean, they're in there for themselves. And I like Lawicki very much, you know. He's personable, a likable guy. But the fact of the matter is that if you give it to them, they're going to take it. They're negotiating for themselves.
You got to be smarter than that.
You got that right.
Okay,
Thank
Mr.
you very much.
Come back up here for a quick second. A couple of points you need to put on the record so that the record is clear and balanced and factual. Respond to some of the points that Mr. Holden raised.
Well, I think one that definitely needs to be cleared up is the assertion that AEG is no longer responsible for making payments on the bonds. That is not true. That agreement goes through, I believe it's 2022 or 2023, and there is an annual calculation of the net new revenues from ticket fees and from parking revenue at the convention center, and that needs to be enough to meet our bond payments.
Any points that you feel you can make on the $12 million?
Well, Mr. Holden is exactly right. There was a $12.5 million cash grant from the CRA that replaced hypothetical future revenue credits. And that check was written to AEG. It is not a loan. It does not need to be repaid.
And the list goes on.
Thank you. I'm sure you will be here time and time again, Mr. Holden. Thank you very much.
No, I'm just going to write about it.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you.
I keep telling you to start your own blog.
Yeah.
All right, so, this is item 1. We do actually have to take a vote on item 1. Got a couple of items that I need for you to report back on. I'll ask committee members to add to the list. Mr. Miller, if you can give us a cost on after-hours meetings. I need to know, the committee needs to know how much that would cost, so we can make an informed decision if we decide to go off campus, when, where, and how much that costs, and if it's worth it to do that. I'd like to make a comment on this possibility of bringing this RFP selection process into the committee. I would prefer to see the staff do its work and do its analysis and keep the elected officials out of an RFP selection. And then come in and report to us. Now, obviously, as the elected officials and committee members, if we disagree with an outcome, we have a right to bring it in and talk about it. But I don't want to be a part of the selection process. I think that is something that's fraught with peril. Mr. Cardenas asked for a report back on public benefits. I believe I think he also asked for, I think you answered the question on having an expert on signage, a consultant on signage. I think you responded to that. Mr. Reyes said that we should devote one meeting completely to planning and land use issues. I completely agree with that, and I would also add an infrastructure on that. And make sure at that point we engage Caltrans to come in and participate in the discussion with us.
Madam Chair, on that one? Could you assess for us if we need to do an RFP for a land use consultant that can help us look at all the land use details? And because given our staff situation.
Sure, planning is part of the group. We'll talk to planning and get back to you on that.
Yeah.
And also the question, in addition to that, whether or not the developer, you can create a mechanism to have the developer pay for the time needed to maybe pull some people back off of ERIP or furlough, or whatever the status is, to help get through this, as we have done, I think, in Playa Vista as an example, and some other really large projects. I also said early on in my comments the clarifying language in terms of negotiation for satisfactory assurances in the form of a guarantee letter, credit or otherwise, and that the developer satisfies its obligation to fund any shortfall to the extent the revenues from numbers items 3 and 5 are insufficient to fund the debt service on the bonds issued to construct the new hall. And I'll give a copy of this to you for your records, Mr. CLA. I believe Mr. Rosendahl wants some reports back.
Yep. First of all, I obviously have heard more than once 12,000 construction jobs. I want to be clear that we have 12,000 construction jobs and also 10,000 permanent jobs. I want to know where that figure comes from, how we can be clear about it. Obviously, jobs is the number one element in making our society go, but I'd like to get a sense of where those numbers are coming from. And back to those amendments, again, for the record, Principle 1, the city's existing and future general fund base shall be fully protected. I do not want it to be the existing, but also the future, so that there's no backslap that comes at us. And the second one, with the second principle, there shall be no public money for the NFL stadium, and of course my amendment is there shall be no public money for the NFL stadium or the downtown event center, and public money and will not be used to subsidize or incent the stadium and event center, or otherwise make infrastructure improvements that the city would not ordinarily make. I'd like to get those answers clear before we're clear about what that all means on that particular principle too. And of course, as I had said before on Principle 7, that add as an additional principle that due to the city's ownership of the property on which the stadium is built, the city shall receive a fair portion of the naming rights. And I know that's negotiating, but that's $700 million. We should get a piece of it, period. And then when we go back to the principle number 9, which is about the EIR, that they cannot go up to Sacramento, get some legislation that protects them. AEG shall complete an environmental impact report which shall fully analyze the impact of the proposed development. And AEG shall not seek or receive legislative protection from litigation regarding the adequacy of the EIR report. Those were my amendments, which I frankly think I'd like to have either a written response back or in the next meeting a comment on them, why you want to do it or why it makes sense, and a report back would be great. And if we're going to go to item 2?
Yeah, right, we got to vote on this. Okay, Tom, Labange? Yeah.
Add to Caltrans, MTA, because the Pico stop on the light rail is it's at Pico, and this stadium is more closer to 11th and 12th. San Diego Chargers, up to 20,000 plus people take the light rail from the center city out to their stadium. That could be a ticket to ride. The same is true with the red line coming from the valley, which would have 4 blocks south of 7th Street Metro Center. So that's real important. Add Caltrans, LADOT, MTA. We have 1% of the art supplies to this, right? Mm-hmm. So I want to create 1% for the athletics. 1% for athletics, just say that, which should help our youth programs, our after-school programs, our high school football programs, our junior college programs, et cetera. What that means, what could that entail? And that could be part of the community benefits, but lay that all out. And Jerry, on the bonds, what are the difference to me on the bonds for the fire station they're building on Hollywood and Van Ness right now? There's bonds that built that station. What's the difference for the bonds of that fire station and the bonds of the convention center? They're just...
Well, you're talking about Prop F on the fire station.
Right.
Those bonds are approved by the voters, and there's an ad valorem tax on every property owner to pay those.
Okay, now the bonds at the convention center were not approved by the voters?
Right. That is
That's real important to know.
Back financing, and it's supported by the general fund.
Supported by the general fund. So that because I would be happier if this play was being called by AEG, which not only would call the full payment of the stadium, but complete payment of the bonds on that issue. But let me ask another question. When we help hospitals and other institutions build, we give them some bonds, correct, or some funding source?
Well, we do not. What you're talking about there is it's called a conduit financing. Nonprofits can go through the Industrial Development Authority or the California Community Statewide Development Authority.
Okay.
Issues on their behalf.
So the convention center would not qualify for that?
No.
Not qualify for that. That's off the table. Remember the kids, football for kids, and also have a discussion about the hopefully the coming to the 2032 Olympic Games, which would be centennial. What that means, what our rights would be as far as a venue, because at least in reading newspaper stories, they strongly believe this could be the site for the NCAA basketball championships and many other big venues. There's a lot of positive there, but I don't want to forget the Olympics and an option that may, which I don't think they would, if this is successful, that they would want to be participant, but to our benefit, because we're the city of Los Angeles. Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Labange.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll take a vote on item number 1. If there is no objection to adopt the recommendations of the chief legislative analyst.
So moved. Yep. So seconded.
Okay.
Third.
Thank you, Mr. Labange.
It's
All right.
done.
It's done. Consider it done. And then, Mr. Miller, if you can give us a quick overview of item 2. Some of us do have to go to public safety.
Sure. Well, very briefly, item number 2 is informational. BOE is here as well, and Convention Center. They've been working very closely with AEG in hiring an architectural firm or firms to design Pico Hall. At this point, the city's making no commitment. The money is all coming from the developer. It's important to have it designed now because a lot of the operational stuff on that design are going to be key to the negotiations. So we need to get that design underway. It's structured to look as much like a city public works contract as if we were doing it ourselves. And again, BOE is here to address any questions you have on that.
Engineering thing, I think it would be great on the issue of the hall if we had a site meeting in the lobby of the convention center so we physically see exactly what's proposed. That's an idea.
Okay.
It's a good one.
Thank you. Anybody from BOE here? Okay. Our
There
chief
he is.
engineer.
Gary Moore.
There he goes.
I think Jerry covered in the overall. If there's any specific questions, I'm here to answer them. Gary Moore, city engineer.
Okay, let's see, Mr. Rosendahl had
Yeah, just make a quick statement on this, okay? This obviously 81 report we got on Friday, which I actually looked at it all Sunday, went page by page. Obviously, I don't know what I've been reading because I'm not an architect or a construction guy. But here are my points. AEG is investigating assisting the city of Los Angeles in a potential development that would include the demolition and replacement of the current West Hall of the Los Angeles Convention Center, with a new West Hall to be located over West Pico Boulevard, which will ultimately remain open for vehicular traffic. The new West Hall would be called Pico Hall. AEG wants to hire an architectural firm to start work on Pico Hall, which they want to open by June 30th, 2013. The new Pico Hall is the bulk of the offer from AEG, in exchange for which they want the city to give them everything else they want, bonds, the stadium, etc. AEG wants to architect to come up with plans for a $220 million facility of no more than 500 square feet with 2,010 square feet, 210,000 square foot main exhibit area. This process appears troubling. Not only is AEG framing what they want to get out of the deal, they are also framing what the city wants out of the deal. Here's the question. AEG wants to build a stadium and event center. They need the help and cooperation of the city of Los Angeles to get that done. In exchange, they're willing to give us the new Pico Hall. They're preparing to hire an architect who will design the new Pico Hall. The parameters of the architecture's work will be a $220 million price tag and a new hall of no more than 500,000 square feet. Who told AEG this is what we need or want? Do we have an answer to that? Did we say that, or did they tell us that's what we want? And then, just to be rhetorical, is this really what we need or want? Will this make our convention center truly competitive with other cities? Would more than 500,000 square feet make us even more competitive? Even with the new Pico Hall, wouldn't we still be smaller than competing venues? I'm concerned that it seems like AEG is telling us exactly what they want and also telling us exactly what we want. I'm not sure whether or not we want to do this deal, but I'll feel much more comfortable if I felt like that we were at least framing the part of the deal that purposefully benefits us. Shouldn't we, the city of Los Angeles, be developing our own list of what we want before they define that for us as an offer to us? Any comments on that?
Well, I think, first of all, AEG is not telling us what we want.
Okay.
Period. They are not. I will not let them. That is not going to happen. Now, Convention Center can come up here and address that. As I said, the Convention Center and BOE were very engaged in developing this. The point of all of this is to replace the exhibit space in the West Hall, with a better designed, more contiguous hall over Pico. There are feasibility issues on how large it can be in total, but the intent is to at least replace what we have now in the West Hall. And part of one of the principles of design is to make sure that the new stadium is designed in such a fashion that it will also connect to the convention center and will also be additional exhibit space. We currently are around 750,000 square feet total. I believe we're somewhere 15 to 20 in the nation with that. With the replacement of the West Hall and the additional exhibit space that the Event Center Stadium will grant us, will be within the top 5 and will exceed 1 million square feet. So
very good. Great. Yes, please.
Again, Puri Abbasi, General Manager, CEO of the Los Angeles Convention Center. Point one, Councilman, we are actively engaged in the process of the selection of the architect. And we have shared our requirements in terms of overall functionality of the new space. And like Jerry said it, basically, it is a proposal by AEG. We are actively engaged in looking at the design aspects and what it is that we need to move forward and be competitive. Again, as I've shared with this committee and the Trade, Commerce, and Tourism Committee, my priority as the responsible party over the convention center business is to be able to replace a 4-decade-old hall. And we don't see a opportunity in foreseeable future to do that, and this points out a conduit through which we can get that done.
Good, thank you for that. Did you want to add anything to that? Great, thank you.
Mr. Reyes?
Yeah,
one more
just
point?
point clarity. Make it crystal clear, when we say additional event space with the new stadium, is the assumption that there will be convention-like space for events somewhere in the new stadium, or the stadium perform as an event space?
Yes, again, the stadium is going to have a retractable roof so that it can be closed up. There will be meeting space around it, and the floor of the stadium itself will be available for large exhibits.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so what's the action that we need to take today, Mr. Miller?
There's no action on this. This is informational.
All right, this is informational only. So just two quick questions. Does the RFP itself comply with our established city policies?
We've shared all 17 requirements that go out with the normal request for qualification in the Department of Public Works, and they've, in their letter, they were going to use all of them in their, with the consultants.
Okay, just one other point. Where was the RFP advertised, and what type of outreach was done to local and minority-owned and women-owned businesses to respond to the RFP?
I could let AEG go into detail, but my understanding is that because of the requirements of the city, they've issued an addendum to their proposals to go out and do a more extensive outreach effort to both MBE and WBE companies. So they're in that period right now, it's my understanding.
Addendum has been issued?
My understanding is the addendum was issued late last week.
Okay, so it's out.
That is yes, that's my understanding.
Mr. Miller, if we could get a report back on that in the next meeting?
Sure.
Okay, great.
Will we be holding this in committee then?
Yeah, I think we should.
Okay.
And if you would work with us, Mr. Clerk, and do a survey of the members, again, on, I think we should meet in 4 weeks. We will be in the midst of our budget discussions, so we're gonna have to find a time. If you could do a survey of all the members and see if we can come up with some consensus on how to do that, we'll need your help.
Also, Madam Chair, just for clarity on item 1, are we holding that in committee pending the report back on the various items that were?
We voted on it, adopted the recommendations. Mr. Miller will report back on those anyway, but we can move it forward.
All right.
But obviously, with those priorities that we listed, the amendments I wanted to make, I want to report back on those amendments.
Those report backs are coming back no matter what.
Yeah. My vote is obviously contingent on those amendments for those principles.
Okay? All right, that marks the end of our official agenda. If there's anyone here wishing to comment on items that are not on the agenda, this is the public comment period, so you can come forward and speak on the record now. Seeing that no one is coming forward, the meeting is officially adjourned.
Great.
To the end.
Yes. Enjoy it.